What is it like living on a Bitcoin standard with that kind of volatility? And I guess for other people that want to pursue that goal, what advice would you have for them?
If you earn and spend in Bitcoin, the price does matter. We were at a huge Bitcoin conference in Amsterdam. There were a little bit over 5,000 people there. That's nothing. There are not a lot of people there. And so if you think about, you can be one of, 50,000 people that go to conferences, that you are in a very small elite group of people that benefit from all three layers of Bitcoin.
I've learned more from the Bitcoin community in the few years that I've been involved in it than I ever learned in traditional finance. I mean, they're literally some of the smartest people I've talked to. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Byte Federal podcast. My guest today, Robin Seyr, is a relentless voice who literally won't stop talking about Bitcoin. He does a podcast every single day for, God, I don't know how long now, Robin, 5 years?
Oh, no.
No, I mean, it's been forever, though. I mean, you're just cranking them out.
Does it seem so long already?
Bitcoin time is a grind these days.
Yeah, I'm closing down actually next week on Friday. So we're recording on the 21st Friday of November, and next week on Friday it will be exactly 2 years since I have my podcast. And I think I started a few months later with daily podcasting. So I'm closing down on 700 episodes.
Oh my goodness, that is amazing. Well, not only are you podcasting like mad, but you're also walking the talk. I mean, you're living the Bitcoin only life. And so I want to dig into that maximalist approach with you today, along with a bunch of other things. But first off, it was awesome to meet you finally in person in Amsterdam. We've had a conversation or two online before, but I mean, you're just such a great guy, and I loved watching you on stage. You had a lot of great insight for people. What did you think of the conference?
Our conference was awesome. I always love going to conferences because the in-person connection feels different.
Mm-hmm.
I know we've seen each other before, and I've seen many of the guests that I've met there before. This is just great to like make a deeper connection. But why I'm really excited about conferences is all the people I never meet. It's the audience of my podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird because I always talk with my guests, and rarely I talk with my audience, which is like the most crucial part of the podcast. Like without the audience, there's no real podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so at those conferences is where I just walk around and where people then come up to me and say like, hey, like I'm a fan of the podcast. I see your podcast. And there I actually get to talk with the people that like the content, my guests, and the things that I produce. And so this is the real reason for me to go there. Of course, there's a lot of like great things, like I can come on stage. I can deepen my connection to like the guests and the partners that I'm working with. But for me, the most important and the biggest reason for me to go there is like, hey, I meet the people that I otherwise never would have met. We can still talk online, but it's really hard to talk with all my audiences.
Yeah, that's for sure. And do you feel like, or I imagine you must get a lot of comments about how you've impacted people. Um, what kind of feedback are you getting from folks, or especially in these like the way the market has been so turbulent?
I try to lead by example, and so what I try to always just preach what I've already done or what I already do. So when I started being into Bitcoin, I said like, I think that could be something. Even before I started the podcast, even before I started my Twitter channel, I told all my friends and the small audience, like my friends that I had back then, so like, oh yeah, I'm looking into Bitcoin. It might be something interesting for the future, but I'm not sure yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did a research while I already started investing in it for a year, 1.5 years. And after that 1.5 years research, I told all my friends, the small audience I had back then, so like I will go all in. And now since about 3 years, because I started my Twitter channel a year before I started my podcast, and the podcast is about 2 years old, I started telling what I do on my Twitter channel. I said like, hey, I believe in that hugely, and this is way undervalued. I think Bitcoin has a massive potential, and so I'm putting all my money in there, and I'm also trying to figure out a way how to put all my life's energy in it. And then a year later, I started a podcast and went actually in February 2024 all into Bitcoin. So I was like, okay, the podcast is all I got. So this is my starting point in working into Bitcoin. Half a year later, I started accepting my first Bitcoin payments, and I told people how important it is to like earn and spend in Bitcoin. And so this was then my journey into like actually being into Bitcoin more and more. And now a couple of, oh gosh, it's already like 4 months ago now, I co-founded my first Bitcoin company where we make microseed, basically the stamping kit that I've been talking about the last couple of weeks. So I'm just trying to give people give as much as possible of value back to the community, but at the same time also lead by example of like, hey, I can actually earn Bitcoin directly and also directly spend them, and already make that vision that we have, that we just use Bitcoin, no fiat, no bank accounts, everything in self-custody possible. And now 2 weeks ago, my newest thing is I had Sailor on my podcast. I was at this 100K party. I had so many strategy people already on my podcast. And I always said, I prefer Bitcoin and self-custody, and I don't want to touch strategy. Now, 2 weeks ago, this kind of changed. I'm like, the prices have come down so far that it gets a little bit more attractive again. And I understood strategy a little bit more. So now I'm dabbling into strategy. I'm not saying like I'm a strategy bull or anything like that. I'm just like, this is too interesting to not be looking into that closer. And so I bought my first few shares of strategy, and now I'm looking into that closer, and let's see how this whole story goes. I think most Bitcoin treasury companies that are pure plays, that just have treasuries and no real business, I think probably will fail. But I might change my opinion on that, as I change my opinion on strategy. But strategy has a real chance, a possibility. I don't know how high this possibility and chances, but it has a real chance of being one of the top 5 companies. And when you look at the market cap of the top 5 companies and the market cap of strategy, there's huge, huge delta there. So that's what I'm trying to do. And that's what I'm also trying to teach in the bear market, in the small phase that we are currently in. This is the time that you should dig deeper of like, what can I provide in the Bitcoin sphere? Where can I double down? And what can I do to come out if when there's again the bull market, to come on top of that and really in an accelerating way. And so I'm also this is the first time I'm giving a small teaser. 2026 will be very different on my channel. I keep the podcast alive, I keep all those things alive, but it will be very different. And so I really got, with that small bear market, also views are down, and the interest is not as big as it was like 3 months ago, even though nothing changed really, just that people are less interested. And this really should give you the time and should give you the incentive to double down and say like, okay, what do I need to do? Like, what can I do? And this might be for someone just to like, okay, maybe I can stack a little bit more. Like that's already amazing. Like buy the dip and not selling. But maybe for someone this is like, hey, maybe now is a great time to start my small passion project in Bitcoin. And maybe this is something that I'm having up and running. And then in the bull market, this is really something great. And so I think we should take action. I think we should do something for and in Bitcoin. And if that's hodling and buying the dip, that's already great. But actually being active in Bitcoin is almost like a multiplier on top of the price that you can integrate yourself in the Bitcoin community. So I think that was already a very long answer to a very simple question.
No, that's cool. Is there anything you can tell us more about what the changes are in 2026?
I'm not finalizing. I didn't finalize it, so I don't. I want to tell the my freelancers and like everyone else beforehand. But I. I analyzed on what audiences really love and what I really want to make. And this podcast in the past couple of months or even like year, it almost felt like I started the podcast because I was really I had this creative thing and I really wanted to make that thing and for the audience, and it was a lot of fun. But now it just feels like I'm like a production machine, and it's just like the creative process kind of went away, and I want to have more time to research. I want to have more time to bring more value to my audience. And my only research I'm currently doing in Bitcoin is interviewing all my guests, which is a huge input for me. Like, don't get me wrong, having like 7 to 10 hours of research every week consistently from the best minds in the Bitcoin space is huge. But digging deeper, making your own thoughts is something completely different. So there's just like a small or big change coming depending on how you look at it. The major thing will stay the same. It will be daily, almost daily, and I will be in it. So
Very cool. I'm excited to see what you come up with. So the thing, we're recording November 21st, Friday. Market last night went down to 81 and change. What is it like living on a Bitcoin standard with that kind of volatility? And I guess for other people that want to pursue that goal, what advice would you have for them?
if you earn and spend in Bitcoin, the price does matter because you likely denominated your earnings and your spendings in US dollars, euros, or in the fiat local currency and not in Bitcoin. And so if you earn in Bitcoin, you want the price actually to go down because then you get more Bitcoin for the same US dollar price. If you spend Bitcoin, you want the price to go up because then you have to spend less Bitcoin for the same US dollar. And so actually the best case is if you earn and spend Bitcoin, because then in realization, it doesn't really matter. Like your net worth maybe, or your purchasing power maybe in the short term goes down, but in the long run, you've like if you look out in the short run, it's always complicated because you could be down and up and all of the things. Because if you look back when I got started into Bitcoin in 2020, the price was around $6,000. Now I'm 5.5 years, something like that, into Bitcoin, and the price is more than 10x higher. I don't think I have a right to complain. Like having a 10x higher Bitcoin price now. Yes, of course, it would be even better if we already had 200,000 or 300,000. But at the same time, I'm thinking back to fundamentals of like what Bitcoin actually is. And if you have more than 20 years to live, most of the audience probably has this, you realize that Bitcoin is huge, and the development of the next 20 years will be even bigger than that, because it is a huge. So there's two logical outcomes for me in Bitcoin. The first logical outcome, it's a miserable failure. Like it just goes to zero, everything implodes, like everything that we're working towards is completely for nothing. I put that at like a 0.001% chance or something like that. It's like the black swan that by definition you cannot see. And yeah, there is a non-zero chance of that happening always and forever with everything in life. But then the other two logical outcomes are it stays where it is. It's a niche market asset where people are investing. It's like a kind of a store of value. And then the other logical outcome is completely revolutionizing the finance world. And I think if Bitcoin always stays as a niche asset, it eventually will fail. So actually, for me, there's just two logical outcomes. It completely fails, or it completely revolutionizes the whole world and their finances. And this is really interesting because if you think about the implications of that, looking down the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years and saying like, oh, we'll go to this Bitcoinized world. We will go to a world where Bitcoin is the fundament of everything. And if this is the case, Bitcoin price going down is actually a gift for your future self. You're like, okay, now I can buy for just $1, not 800 satoshis, but I can buy now 1,100 or 1,200 satoshis, whatever it is. And this actually, when you get into the mindset of I can buy with the same $, with the same euro, more freedom tokens, more sovereignty tokens, however you want to frame it, then it makes a lot more sense. And then it's just about the strategy of circumventing the short-term volatility. And if you have a business with, let's say, 50 employees, make sure that payroll doesn't depend on the Bitcoin price.
Right.
Maybe at that point, it makes sense to have some fiat savings, something laying around. Maybe you have some, I heard James Jack talk about that, having savings in gold to pay short-term obligations, because gold is a lot more stable than Bitcoin from the volatility standpoint. And so have a safety net or have something where you pay people, or more realistic is if you have a family of your wife and 2 kids, you want to make sure your likelihood of your family doesn't depend solely on the Bitcoin price. And so you want to make sure they're all good, even if Bitcoin goes down 90%. This is always like, I think Saylor says that a lot. Would you still be fine if the Bitcoin price goes down 90%? If the answer to that is no, it's a problem for you, because I'm not saying it's likely. I think the max we will get is probably 50% from the all-time high, but it's a possibility that it goes 90% down. And so you should prepare for that, even though it's not likely to happen, because you never want to be in a situation where you saw Bitcoin at 126, it fell down to $10,000, and then it shoots up to $1 million, and you had to sell half of your Bitcoin at 10,000 because you didn't plan for that situation.
Yeah.
And so managing that short-term volatility is extremely important, especially if you are really ingrained or all in or like completely adopted of Bitcoin. Those are way more susceptible to those high volatility changes. If you have a fiat job and a fiat income, and you just use Bitcoin as savings, it might not be as bad, because you just have the fiat incoming that covers your expenses. And how big the purchasing power of your stack is doesn't matter, because you anyways don't touch it the next 10 to 20 years.
Right. That and you're speaking from experience, because I know you do have a family, and you are living off Bitcoin, and a lot of what you were saying is almost identical to the way we built Byte Federal, because we couldn't get a bank account early on. Every time we got a bank account, it gets shut down, and so we came up with the slogan "Bank Yourself." And we banked our business on Bitcoin. And so, we'd sell the Bitcoin to customers, and we'd go refill, and we would manage an inventory of Bitcoins. It's very similar. Sounds very similar to the lifestyle you're living. And in making that work, it does seem like spending and refilling is sort of the flow that actually over the long run has paid off, because the volatility in Bitcoin is mostly predominantly to the upside. We do get these very sharp and violent downtrends like we are recently, but over the lifespan, over your lifespan or the lifespan of your business, it seems like that general trend to the upside does pay off. And so but it's hard for people, right? Especially if they're, because I think, isn't it, don't you think it's like so much easier to see where this thing is going than to see over the long term and to rationalize that and come to the conclusion that this thing wins, while at the same time it's so hard to predict or foresee the short-term volatility. And so how do you recommend to your viewers, your followers, to participate in this network so that they can benefit from the long term and not get shaken out by leverage or a lack of income?
There are three main ways you benefit from Bitcoin. And the last one might be the most interesting one. So the first one for me is the wealth aspect, which is really super simple. You buy Bitcoin and you get wealthier over time. Of course, you have the short-term volatility and all of that. Like, you should never be in a position where you have to sell. But that's just like the wealth aspect. The second one is the freedom aspect. You benefit a lot from that aspect, as you just said with Byte Federal. Without Bitcoin, you wouldn't have a bank account, but Bitcoin can be your bank account, and especially that's why my official business also has no Bitcoin in the name, because actually a Bitcoin business in Austria was like, don't call it anything with Bitcoin. You have a problem with bank accounts, so just call it something else, and you will be good to go. And nobody cares if there's Bitcoin in the name. It raises some flags, and there are systems, and there's Bitcoin in the name, and all of a sudden there's like a red flag next to your name. If you don't call it Bitcoin and you do the same thing, there's no red flag. So now I'm just a media company talking on the internet in the eyes of the Austrian authorities. And so this is the second thing, the freedom aspect. You can run your own node. You can be private. You can do self-custody. Nobody can stop a transaction. If I want to pay Paul, nobody can stop us from it. He can just give me an address, and the money goes from my Bitcoin bank account to his Bitcoin bank account. And obviously in self-custody, so there's no real bank accounts, but I hope people get that. And then the last thing, how people can benefit, is the cultural, the social layer. So you can actually participate in the social layer and the cultural layer of Bitcoin, going to conferences. I would even count providing products and services in there, setting up a meetup, setting up something along the way, that, because yes, you can get wealthy from Bitcoin, and that's great. You get more freedom from Bitcoin. That's also great. But what if you can also be friends with all those wealthy individuals in the future? You can build citadels together. What if you build products for Bitcoin? So you benefit from having Bitcoin, and then you benefit double by providing helpful services and products for the Bitcoin community. You basically double your exposure to Bitcoin. You will be double screwed if Bitcoin fails, but you will be double the reward if Bitcoin is what we think it is. And so those are, for me, the three main layers, the three main pillars of how you can actually benefit from Bitcoin. And the last one is the one that only a few do. If you think about how many people, we were at a huge Bitcoin conference in Amsterdam, and I just got today actually the press email from Bitcoin Magazine. There were a little bit over 5,000 people there. That's nothing. That are not a lot of people there. And so if you think about, you can be one of, 50,000 people that go to conferences worldwide to Bitcoin conferences, to Bitcoin only conferences. You are in a very small elite group of people that benefit from all three layers of Bitcoin. And you have not only the wealth aspect, you also have the freedom and the cultural aspect. And so what I recommend people doing is, first of all, make sure you benefit from the wealth aspect. Don't get wrecked in a bear market. Don't sell it when it's low. Like all those logical things that I think most of our audiences already know. Then the second thing is, make sure you have self-custody. If for some reason self-custody is not a possibility for you, make sure you are as close as possible to self-custody and as sovereign as possible for you. That might be all different kinds of solutions for you. And then if you can, and you should run your own node. You should investigate in the Bitcoin ecosystem. I mean, you could even go ahead and say, hey, I want to mine Bitcoin. And this is also something where it's not just about supporting the network. It's not just about the education. You can actually also earn money from that, which also can benefit you in other ways. But especially the educational part of mining Bitcoin and participating in the network part is already amazing. And then the last point, as I said, like the cultural aspect of Bitcoin, you being an organizer of a meetup, you being an organizer of a conference, you doing a podcast, you doing content on the internet, you're writing an article, or maybe, hey, if you have a lot of thoughts on Bitcoin, why don't you write a series of articles and maybe it turns out to be a book, and maybe you have an interesting idea how you can make a certain part of the Bitcoin story better or easier. Maybe there is a product or service that you can develop from that. And so there's a lot of ways you can participate. It's just a matter of how deep down the rabbit hole you really want to go. And I try to go as deep as possible.
I couldn't agree more. I think that cultural aspect is overlooked immensely. It's I've learned more from the Bitcoin community in the few years that I've been involved in it than I ever learned in traditional finance. I mean, they're literally some of the smartest people I've talked to. And if you're just open and humble, they are tremendously I guess they're very willing to help you, advise you, give you guidance, make connections for you. They just want to know that they're working with a true Bitcoiner that is passionate about the project and passionate about the values that Bitcoin can bring to humanity. And if you are that person, man, they're an incredibly generous group. So I think that's super important. But culturally speaking, where is Europe these days? Like,
Mm.
I'm curious because there was a lot of conversation in Amsterdam about the regulatory environment, some of the difficulties between different countries. I guess where do you see adoption really accelerating in Europe? Where do you see some of the difficulties? What might need to change there?
This is a really interesting question. For I um I know that in English speaking there's mostly also American audience, so I try to first like bring it into context for American people. If you look, if a European looks to America, it almost seems like it's one country.
Mhm.
I've been to America now twice. I will be soon in February, or like in January, the third time there, and I've seen that when you fly to different parts of America, it's a whole different
Mhm.
feeling. It's a whole different country, and so there's a different vibe in Michigan than it is in New York, than it is in Las Vegas, and than it is in California
100%.
or
Yeah.
Miami or Austin. There's very different vibes in there, and the same, maybe even more extreme. The difference is in Europe, and so when you look at the different European nation states, it's very different how they think and how they act. So France is very different to Austria, is very different to many other parts of the world. For example, the Czech National Bank, as you probably are aware, bought the first $1 million of Bitcoin and crypto. So this is a huge step, and they also have a little bit more freedom in terms of doing that because they still have their own national bank with their own currency. They are in the EU, but they still have the Czech krona. Who everyone that was at Bitcoin Prague has seen that you still pay with the Czech krona. You can also pay with euros; they are no problem. But everyone that pays there is the Czech krona, and so now they are doing what Lagarde didn't think
Mm.
they would do. I still remember her interview saying like, "Oh, they will not do it. They are just talking." All of those things, and now here we are, just a couple of months later. They actually did it, and yes, they're calling it an experiment, but they wrote a paper on it. They are now putting out an experiment, buying $1 million worth of Bitcoin and cryptos. My guess is there is 2026 a huge announcement coming, like, oh yeah, we are converting X percentage of our balance sheets towards Bitcoin. It's the new kind of like they will. It seems like they understood it, why they need it, and they will steamroll ahead. I could be wrong here. I obviously have no insider information in the Czech National Bank, being like a tourist 3 times in Czech, but. This is a place, for example, the Czech Republic, where a lot of flourishing happens in Bitcoin. If you go around Prague, you see Bitcoin stickers at restaurants. You can pay most of the things in Bitcoin. I paid both my hotels when I was in Prague with Bitcoin because the hotels actually offer it. And those were not even the recommended hotels by the Bitcoin Prague conference. So it's just a random hotel that I saw that there are Bitcoiners coming once a year, a lot of them to Prague, and they're like, we should accept that currency there. And so this is a place where it's really great developed. And there's, for example, also Lugano. You can pay almost everything in Bitcoin there. The Tether brought a lot of adoption to Bitcoin there. And this is basically the closest thing we have to Bitcoin City in Europe. There's certain comparisons that you can make that Bitcoin as legal tender, even though it's not fully legal tender there, works better, or Bitcoin as a medium of exchange works better in Lugano than in all of El Salvador. Because it's just like a small city where the mayor is a massive Bitcoiner who goes around town and says to vendors, hey, please adopt Bitcoin. And if you see at those Bitcoin maps and zoom into Europe, you're like, there's a huge dot in Switzerland, and that's all Lugano. There's like so many vendors and all across, like it's nothing. And then there's Lugano, a major spot. So there is a lot going on. And then there is the German-speaking area, the Austrian, the Czechs, and the Swiss, and all of those. They are really strong when it comes to grassroots movement. They are really strong. If you, for example, see the biggest hubs of full node operators, Germany is, I think, number 3, 2, or 4.
Wow.
Like they're up there. They're really big because they're really on the sovereignty space. And Germany is not that huge. They're like, what, 80 million people or something like that. It's like a fourth or fifth of the United States. And so even though they're not that big, they're really huge on privacy. If you go to Germany, you will find a lot of Bitcoiners that are extremely focused on privacy, that are extremely focused on self-custody, self-sovereignty. They really don't want the state to look into bank accounts and all of that. And till this day in Germany, after 1 year, you don't pay taxes on your Bitcoin gains. Or even in Czech, I think there's like a 3-year waiting period. So like if you hold Bitcoin for longer than 3 years, which I anyways recommend, you don't pay taxes on any capital gains that you might have. Austria is a bad example of that. They had that same rule, but they got rid of that. And so to close that all off, I think adoption in Europe goes at different speeds in different countries, as it probably also does in America. But the main difference is that the politicians in Europe are not as vocal about Bitcoin and still more afraid to talk about it, while now Trump in America seems to have broken that magical thing that was around Bitcoin, and all of a sudden now you can talk about it. Now actually, if you talk bad about it, it's just bad for you. Being against Bitcoin no longer wins votes. Like you don't win anybody over by just saying like, oh, I'm against Bitcoin. But you could win votes by saying you're for Bitcoin. You could also lose some other votes if you say you're for Bitcoin. But the major thing is, you no longer you no longer gain votes from someone just because you're for Bitcoin. And this is a major advantage because now Bitcoin is so integrated. Before it was the thing for criminals, the thing that was a bubble, the thing that was bad for the environment. Those arguments are all gone now. I don't know if you've noticed, but nobody talks about Bitcoin being for criminals. Because now BlackRock is in there, the Czech National Bank, the US president. Like it's a really hard argument to make. It's like you if you say Bitcoin is only for criminals, you're basically calling the Czech National Bank, the US president, the Elon Musk, the richest guy alive, BlackRock, the Larry Fink. You call all them criminals. And yeah, maybe you could make an argument that some of them are criminals, but it's a really hard argument now to say Bitcoin is for criminals. And then like the environmental thing, like I think I haven't heard anyone talk about that since a year. I think since BlackRock since BlackRock came to the game, and nobody cares now about the environmental thing of Bitcoin, because it's clearly a good thing for the environment and not a bad thing. The arguments are very, very strong on that side. And so my overall point is all the massive negatives that you could put on Bitcoin are gone now. And now it's just about slowly adopting, slowly getting all the things right. And now, right after everything kind of got positive, we have that dip now as a huge opportunity. And we have huge ways before us where everything kind of is flourishing for Bitcoin. So I don't know. It's hard to say where we go from here, but I'm hugely bullish on where Bitcoin is currently set. And no matter if you're in Europe, in America, in US, Canada, wherever you are, like Bitcoin will be tremendously good for you, and no politician can ever say anything against that. I just see that in America, the politicians already get it a little bit more, are more vocal about it, and in Europe, they still need a little bit of time. But if you hear some politicians, some single voices, you already see there are some bigger ones that actually do say positive things about Bitcoin. Czech Bank being one example.
You've been very vocal in the past about, for people to really understand Bitcoin, they really need to understand money. And I totally agree with that. And that sometimes is like a really difficult thing to explain to maybe just a listener of the podcast or somebody you meet at a party, etc. And I constantly struggle with it, right? Because it becomes like a 3-hour conversation and they're looking desperately around the room for somebody else to go talk to. But the politicians, like, how many of them do you really think understand money? Or do you think it's all about the vote and they don't want to anger a voter?
They don't understand money. This is really interesting. If you ask a fish about how's the water today, the fish will be like, oh, like what water? And it's a similar thing with politicians. They're so integrated in this political scheme. And I don't know how it is in the US actually, but I know in Austria, but also in Europe in general, there are a lot of politicians that are just politicians. So they grew up in the party, and then they got bigger and bigger within the party, and all of a sudden they're politicians, and they've never seen the outside world. So they have never seen how it is in the private industry, what it takes to get a job, what it takes to maintain a job, what it takes to actually build a company, and all of that. Most of the politicians actually have never done that. And so when you think about the mindset of a political person, they are in their own kind of water, and they don't really see outside of it. And if you see how ingrained the central banking system is in the political layer, the euro and all of the central banking is so close to them that they don't really see anything above that. And of course, if you then tell them that the central bank is a huge scam, you are shattering their belief system in a major way. There are some exceptions to that, of course, like not all politicians are like that. There are some small examples of that, but I'm talking about the average. And so those politicians really have a hard time grasping what money really is and why central banking might not be the best system. When you think about the implications of that, you see that the lawmakers, the people that make decisions, always will vote for that system to continue, always will defend that system, as long as it is popular. That's why it's so important for us to make a grassroots movement. And that's why it's important for us as Bitcoiners to call on your politicians and say, hey, Bitcoin is important for me. Please look into that. And I've seen countless posts and countless people already saying, hey, I called up my local politicians that is in the national parliament and said like, hey, I want to sit down with you and ask you questions about Bitcoin. I want to send you an email, ask you questions about Bitcoin. Force them to take it serious, because then people all of a sudden, all the fish that swim in the political pool, all of a sudden are hearing and listening and reading about what is outside of the water. There is like a land, there's like palm trees and all of those things. And all of a sudden they're like, there's something else also. There's an alternative system that might be built. And so it's really important for us to make them aware there's more to the thing that they already know, but it's also important to meet them where they are. If there's a politician that is really close into this political system that have never seen the outside world, and if you tell them the central bank is a huge scam, they just put the label of conspiracy theorist on you and they never talk to you again. And so warming them up to the idea of like, oh yeah, maybe the euro is not working as good as it was, and maybe we have to rethink some decisions, and just being slower and more gradual with that. It's actually Saylor was 1.5 years ago on my podcast, and he talked about sales, and he talked about the importance of good salespeople in Bitcoin, and he had like I think a 20 or 30 minute segment where he talked about how hard it is to convince someone of something, even though you know he needs it, you know the solution is the best that you have, and you can do everything for him, and he will only benefit. Like it's like you have the cure of someone's cancer, it's perfect, and then he's like, oh, but how can I pay for it? And you're like, here's a finance option, all of that, and there's just like, I don't know, like should I really like? Even if you have the perfect solution for someone, there might still be a natural kind of tendency to say no, a natural tendency to really don't like that thing. And this is quite normal actually in revolutions. If you think about electricity or the internet, we always had to go through that. Every evolution that is hugely changing the game or the sphere that we are in, every one of those evolutions has to be faced by massive criticism and massive challenges, because it's changing the status quo. And the status quo, as we humans are working, will always be protected. So they want to protect themselves. They want to protect the status quo, even though the new system might be better. But it's uncertainty that bothers people. It's uncertainty than saying like, I've lived with that cancer for a long time now. What if I use that solution and I die? It's that uncertainty that it might not work.
Mm-hmm.
It's that uncertainty that I'm like, yeah, there's a non-zero chance that Bitcoin fails. Like, why would I do it? And so this uncertainty is really hard for people because it's a new thing and it's not guaranteed, obviously, because nothing in life is guaranteed. And so there will always be a huge challenge, a huge resistance for change in people. And it's just the only cure for that resistance is time. And you have to give them the time to understand it. I had 3 years from 2017 to 2020 where I was aware of Bitcoin, where I invested money, where I was already working. But unfortunately, I thought that Bitcoin is a scam. And so for 3 years straight, I was in that investing game. I heard constantly about Bitcoin and I always dismissed it as a scam. And just sometimes a lucky coincidence on 2020, a guy that I respected and I liked asked me about Bitcoin. He was not even in Bitcoin. And he's like, what do you really think about it? And like, what are your arguments against it? And I discovered that I really don't have good arguments. And in the pursuit of figuring out what's wrong with Bitcoin, I figured out what's right with Bitcoin. And then I came into Bitcoin. But it takes time to understand that your swimming in a water that might not be beneficial for you. Maybe you want to visit an island. Maybe you want to visit the land, which is Bitcoin, and the water around you might just be even intoxicated and poisoned. The solution swimming out of that water is uncertainty, because maybe you cannot breathe on land. And so I think it's the uncertainty that keeps people away from Bitcoin, and it is new, and I don't know about it. I don't want to investigate it. Like a lot of research, and so most people will discover Bitcoin after $1 million.
Yeah.
I said that multiple times. People are always freaked out when I say that, but before $1 million, like at $1 million of Bitcoin, 90% of people will still not get Bitcoin. We are maybe now, we're like 1% of the population really like gets it, and they're like more and more into it, maybe 2-3% even, but I think we're actually under 1%. At $1 million, we might be at 10%, maybe, probably under that. And so most people will still not get it. And then we still have a huge way in front of us.
Wow. The analogy of the water, it just made me think, like, you could at least get a life raft and throw a little bit of your a little bit of your resources into the life raft just in case, right? You can still swim in the water underneath the life raft, but get something in the life raft, man. And this idea, I think for us who've been in Bitcoin, I class of 2017 as well, and it's hard to imagine Bitcoin not going to 1 million. So that being said, I've got a quote of yours here. It says, owning just 0.21 Bitcoin is a big deal, and it could change your life forever. So I wonder if you could just kind of elaborate on that, and how you see just that little fraction of a Bitcoin that somebody could throw in that life raft could change their life.
It comes back to what I said in the beginning. Bitcoin either miserably fails, then 0.1 Bitcoin doesn't matter. It also doesn't matter if you have 21 Bitcoin, or it completely revolutionizes everything. And in that situation, if you think about the scarcity that Bitcoin has, the first time I figured out Bitcoin was like, okay, it might not be a scam, so it might be an interesting investment. And then I figured more about Bitcoin out, and I'm like, okay, maybe Bitcoin is an interesting savings technology. And then I realized, okay, after figuring more out, maybe Bitcoin is money. And then you figure out, okay, what is actually the total addressable market for money? If you come from the stock world, you always want to figure out what is the total addressable market for the company that I'm investing in. And so for Bitcoin, and if it's just money, we have to figure out what is the market of money. And then you have this chart of Jesse Meyer saying like, oh, money is kind of like 100 trillion or like 150 trillion. But that's not telling the full story, because if you think about real estate, how many people buy real estate just to preserve wealth, just to not lose against inflation? I would argue a lot of people do that. There's only a handful of people that really make real estate because of business, because they want to develop multiple complexes. They buy real estate as a profitable business rather than a home for their family. And so if you think about the implications of what Bitcoin will do, and sucking up financial energy from the real estate market, and this also goes to that bucket. Then we go further and further to stocks. How many people invest in an ETF just because they want to preserve wealth? Probably everyone. And probably all of them are better off with Bitcoin. So then we have bonds and all of those other instruments. And so I have heard a lot of different estimates, but I like really the estimate that I think Seyfarth also always references, that the money total addressable market cap is around 400 to 500 trillion. But we have the behavior of it being expensive. Not expensive, it being extensive. So whenever you have an asset that is superior than anything else on the market, it might just grow the market in itself. So if Bitcoin is the best store of value, the best mean of exchange, and the best just place for your financial energy, why don't you put most of your money in there and gamble with a little bit else? So why don't you have a strategy where 80% of your wealth is in Bitcoin, and then with 10% or 15%, you can gamble and say like, maybe I invest in that startup, maybe invest in like those stocks on all of those things. And so if this is the most popular portfolio of saying it's mostly Bitcoin, and then some more speculative investments, and not like 50% bonds and 60% like stocks and all that 60-40 portfolio, like all that is gone in my opinion. And then you could end up in a situation where Bitcoin actually is not only the biggest asset in the market, but bigger than anything else combined. So where we have, if we now have that 900 trillion or 1,000 trillion of total worth in the world, Bitcoin might be 600 trillion of that. There's a real possibility, because if it is so good, why wouldn't you be in Bitcoin? Why wouldn't you save your money in the best asset ever, even 50 years down the road? And so then you ask yourself, okay, if it's 600 trillion and Bitcoin is now at 2 trillion, probably under 2 trillion now with the dip, but let's just say 2 trillion, that's a 300x from here just in purchasing power. So there's no inflation built into that, because obviously as the dollars get more into the system, the 1,000 trillion get to be 2,000 trillion and 3,000 trillion. So with no inflation at all, you now have the possibility to 300x from here with like decades down the line. And so when you really think about what is the full potential, the best case for Bitcoin, then everything in Bitcoin, even if you have just a few UTXOs on the main chain, will be huge. I mean, we made that actually in Amsterdam on stage. We talked about that not every business on planet Earth will have access to the main chain. Right. UTXOs are scarce. So not everyone will ride on the Rolls Royce of the Bitcoin main chain. Some people have to, or most businesses will have to adopt a Lightning or a layer on top of that. And so how scarce it is for you to own just 0.21 Bitcoin is huge. It can completely change your life, but it will not change the life of you next year. That's, I think, what always people get wrong of, like, when I say like 0.1 Bitcoin is a huge deal, people are like, oh no, it's not. Like it's a tiny amount. Of course, if you like, if you see the today's value. And there's also an important note here. It depends where in the world you are. Like if you are a lawyer with in New York City that earns like 500,000 a year, you can get a lot more than 0.1 Bitcoin. You should get a lot more. But if you are a student in India that has I don't know, a Saturday job that pays like €100 or $100 per month, like 0.21 Bitcoin is already huge, like in today's value. And so it always depends a little bit on like, what is your expenditure, like what in what situation you are in, to really say what is a big deal for you. But whatever you have right now, 300x that, and you're like, oh, that's actually quite a big deal. And if you have a little bit in Bitcoin and you 300x that amount right now, and you still don't think this is a huge deal, then buy more. Like figure out to, it might be a little bit unpopular, but if the CAGR of Bitcoin, if Bitcoin doesn't grow fast enough for you, you might have an income problem and not an asset or store of value problem. And I say that with all of my heart, but like you might want to if 50% a year of annual growth rate of Bitcoin is not enough for you, you have an income problem, not the asset problem. The last sentence I say is one thing that I've learned from so many podcasts: most people underestimate the impact that Bitcoin will have, but they overestimate the speed of the adoption. So they think we're going faster where we're going, but actually they're underestimating how far we're actually going with Bitcoin.
Very well said. Robin, this has been a great conversation. You are a wealth of knowledge. You've over 700 podcasts. You've absorbed a lot, and thank you for sharing all that information with us. Everybody who's out there, like and subscribe so we continue to get great guests like Robin here, and visit his YouTube channel if you haven't. I doubt most of you probably have already, but go and check out what he's done. He's got an extensive library of fantastic conversations. So thank you, Robin, for your time today. We appreciate you and keep up all the great work.
Thank you so much for hosting me.
My pleasure.